When a racist cop cuts a black girl's hair, she has no idea she's just crossed the daughter of one of the FBI's most powerful agents. What happens next will change their lives, and the town forever. It was a crisp autumn afternoon in the small town of Willow Creek, a place where everyone knew everyone, or so they thought. Officer Linda Grayson, a veteran cop with a reputation for being tough and uncompromising, patrolled the streets with a sense of authority that bordered on arrogance. Her blonde hair was always perfectly tied back, her uniform immaculate, and her demeanor cold. She had been on the force for over 15 years, and in her mind she had seen it all. Meanwhile, 17-year-old Tasha Johnson was walking home from school, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her headphones in her ears. Tasha was a bright, ambitious student with dreams of becoming a lawyer. She had a natural beauty about her, with her dark skin glowing in the sunlight and her hair styled in a protective braid that cascaded down her back. Tasha was proud of her hair. It was a symbol of her identity, her culture, and her strength. As Tasha crossed the street, Officer Grayson's patrol car rolled to a stop beside her. The window rolled down, and Grayson's steely blue eyes locked onto Tasha. "Hey, you," Grayson called out, her voice sharp and commanding. "Come here." Tasha paused, pulling out one of her earbuds. "Me?" she asked, confusion etched across her face. "Yes, you," Grayson snapped. "I need to talk to you." Tasha approached the car cautiously, her heart beginning to race. She had heard stories about Officer Grayson, how she had a tendency to target black and brown kids in the neighborhood. But Tasha had never had a run-in with her before. She tried to stay calm, reminding herself that she hadn't done anything wrong. "Is there a problem, officer?" Tasha asked, her voice steady, despite the unease growing inside her. Grayson stepped out of the car, her tall frame towering over Tasha. She looked the girl up and down, her eyes narrowing. "You fit the description of a suspect we're looking for," Grayson said, her tone accusatory. "A young black girl about your height was involved in a robbery earlier today." Tasha's eyes widened in disbelief. "A robbery? I've been at school all day. You can check with my teachers if you don't believe me." Grayson smirked, clearly unconvinced. "We'll see about that. Turn around and put your hands on the car." Tasha's stomach churned as she complied, her mind racing. She knew she was innocent, but the way Grayson was looking at her made her feel like a criminal. Grayson began patting her down, her hands rough and invasive. Tasha clenched her teeth, trying to hold back the tears that were welling up in her eyes. Then Grayson's eyes fell on Tasha's braid. "What's this?" she asked, tugging at the braid. "You think you can hide something in here?" "It's just my hair," Tasha said, her voice trembling. "Please, don't—" Before Tasha could finish, Grayson pulled out a pair of scissors from her belt. "We'll see about that," she said, a cruel smile spreading across her face. Tasha's heart pounded in her chest as Officer Grayson's cold, unfeeling eyes locked onto her braid. The officer's gloved hand reached out, tugging at the intricate plait as if it were evidence of some crime. Tasha instinctively stepped back, her hands flying up to protect her hair, but Grayson was quicker. She gripped Tasha's shoulder firmly, forcing her to stay in place. "What are you doing?" Tasha pleaded, her voice trembling. "It's just my hair. Please, don't—" Grayson didn't respond. Instead, she pulled a pair of scissors from her utility belt. The metallic, precious snip sound sending a chill down Tasha's spine. The officer's face was a mask of determination, as if she truly believed she was doing something necessary, something justified. "You think you can hide something in here?" Grayson muttered, more to herself than to Tasha. She grabbed the braid again, this time with more force, and positioned the scissors at the base. "No! Stop!" Tasha cried, her voice breaking as tears streamed down her face. She tried to pull away, but Grayson's grip was unrelenting. The sound of the scissors slicing through her hair was deafening, each cut feeling like a violation of her body, her identity, her very soul. The braid fell to the ground, a lifeless coil on the pavement. Tasha's hands shot up to her head, her fingers trembling as they touched the jagged, uneven strands that remained. She felt exposed, humiliated, and utterly powerless. Her hair had been more than just a style. It was a connection to her culture, her heritage, and her sense of self. And now it was gone, severed by the hands of someone who saw her as less than human. Grayson stepped back, holding the braid in her hand like some kind of twisted trophy. She examined it briefly as if looking for contraband, before tossing it aside dismissively. "See? Nothing hidden," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "You can go now." Tasha stood frozen, her chest heaving as she tried to process what had just happened. The weight of the violation crushed her, leaving her feeling small and broken. She looked down at the braid on the ground, a symbol of everything she had lost in that moment. But as the shock began to wear off, a fire ignited within her. This wasn't just about her hair, it was about the systemic racism and abuse of power that had allowed Grayson to do this without a second thought. Tasha clenched her fists, her tears drying as a newfound determination took hold. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed her father's number. When he answered, her voice was steady, despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. "Dad," she said, her tone firm, "I need you." The violation had broken her, but it had also awakened something in Tasha, a resolve to fight back, to demand justice, and to ensure that no one else would have to endure what she had. The battle was far from over, and Tasha was ready to take it on. The air was thick with tension as Marcus Johnson's sleek black SUV screeched to a halt near the scene. He stepped out, his presence immediately commanding attention. Marcus was a tall, broad-shouldered man with an aura of authority that made people take notice. His sharp suit and polished shoes contrasted with the casual attire of the onlookers who had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. His eyes, usually calm and calculating, now burned with a quiet fury as he took in the sight before him. Tasha stood a few feet away, her shoulders slumped and her face streaked with tears. Her hands clutched at the uneven strands of her hair, a stark reminder of the violation she had just endured. Marcus's heart clenched at the sight of his daughter, usually so confident and strong, now looking so vulnerable. "Tasha," Marcus called out, his voice steady but laced with concern. She turned to him, her eyes widening with relief as she ran into his arms. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking. "She cut my hair. She said I fit the description of a suspect, but I didn't do anything wrong." Marcus held her tightly, his jaw tightening as he processed her words. He glanced over her shoulder at Officer Grayson, who was still standing by her patrol car, her arms crossed and her expression defiant. The braid she had cut lay discarded on the ground, a silent testament to her cruelty. Marcus gently released Tasha and turned to face Grayson, his eyes narrowing. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Grayson hesitated for a moment, sensing the gravity of the situation, but her arrogance quickly resurfaced. "I was just doing my job," she said, her tone dismissive. "Your daughter matched the description of a suspect, and I had to take necessary precautions." Marcus took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. "You cut my daughter's hair," he said, his voice rising with each word. "You humiliated her, violated her, and for what? Because she's black? Because you thought you could get away with it?" Grayson's confidence wavered, but she refused to back down. "I don't have to explain myself to you," she snapped. "I'm a police officer, and I have the authority to do what I deem necessary." Marcus's eyes bore into hers, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the street was silent, the tension palpable. Then Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his badge, holding it up for Grayson to see. "FBI," he said, his voice cold and steady. "And you're going to explain yourself to me, whether you like it or not." Grayson's face paled as a realization hit her. Her eyes flicked from the badge to Marcus's face, then to Tasha, who stood tall beside her father, her chin lifted in defiance. The smugness in Grayson's demeanor evaporated, replaced by a flicker of fear. Marcus turned to Tasha, his voice softening. "Go wait in the car, sweetheart. I'll handle this." Tasha nodded, casting one last glance at Grayson before walking to the SUV. As she climbed inside, Marcus turned his attention back to the officer, his expression hardening once more. "You've made a grave mistake," he said, his voice low and menacing. "And you're going to answer for it." Grayson opened her mouth to protest, but Marcus cut her off. "Save it," he said. "You'll have plenty of time to explain yourself to the FBI." As Marcus pulled out his phone to call for backup, Grayson's bravado crumbled. She looked around as if searching for an escape, but there was none. The crowd that had gathered was watching intently, their murmurs growing louder as the reality of the situation sank in. For Marcus, this wasn't just about his daughter. It was about justice. It was about holding those in power accountable for their actions and ensuring that no one else would have to suffer the way Tasha had. The revelation of his identity had shifted the balance of power, and Grayson was about to learn that no one was above the law. As the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, Marcus stood tall, his eyes never leaving Grayson's. The reckoning had begun, and there was no turning back. The days that followed Officer Grayson's confrontation with Marcus Johnson were a whirlwind of chaos and accountability. Marcus, leveraging his position as a high-ranking FBI agent, launched a full-scale investigation into Grayson's conduct. What began as a personal mission to seek justice for his daughter quickly unraveled into a much larger expose of systemic abuse and racial profiling within the Willow Creek Police Department. Marcus worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and interviewing witnesses. He discovered that Grayson had a long history of targeting black and brown individuals, often using excessive force and intimidation tactics under the guise of doing her job. Complaints had been filed against her in the past, but they had been brushed aside or buried by a department more interested in protecting its own than upholding justice. As the investigation gained momentum, the community rallied behind Tasha and her family. Protests erupted outside the police station, with people of all races and backgrounds demanding accountability and reform. Signs reading "Justice for Tasha" and "End Racial Profiling" filled the streets, and the local news media descended on Willow Creek, turning the small town into a national focal point for discussions about police brutality and systemic racism. Tasha, though still healing from the trauma of the incident, found strength in the support of her community. She stood alongside her father at press conferences, her voice steady as she shared her story. "What happened to me wasn't just about my hair," she said, her words resonating with millions. "It was about power, control, and the belief that some people can treat others as less than human because of the color of their skin. But I'm here to say that enough is enough." Meanwhile, Grayson's world crumbled around her. Suspended from the force and facing multiple charges, including assault, misconduct, and civil rights violations, she found herself isolated and vilified. Her attempts to defend herself fell on deaf ears as the evidence against her mounted. Body camera footage from the incident went viral, showing her callously cutting Tasha's hair while the teenager pleaded for her to stop. The public outcry was immediate and overwhelming. The courtroom became the stage for Grayson's reckoning. During the trial, Tasha took the stand, her head held high despite the uneven strands of hair that served as a constant reminder of the violation she had endured. She spoke with poise and clarity, recounting the humiliation and pain she had felt that day. Her testimony, coupled with the mountain of evidence Marcus had gathered, left no room for doubt. Grayson was found guilty on all counts. The judge, in delivering the verdict, condemned her actions as a blatant abuse of power and a violation of the public trust. She was stripped of her badge, sentenced to prison, and ordered to undergo sensitivity training, though many argued that the punishment was not enough to address the deeper issues at play. For Tasha and Marcus, the victory was bittersweet. While they had achieved justice in this case, they knew that Grayson was just one symptom of a much larger problem. Marcus used his platform to advocate for systemic change, pushing for reforms in policing practices and greater accountability for law enforcement officers. Tasha, inspired by the ordeal, decided to pursue a career in law, determined to fight for justice and equality on a broader scale. The story of Tasha and Officer Grayson became a catalyst for change, not just in Willow Creek, but across the country. It sparked conversations about race, power, and the need for accountability in positions of authority, and for Tasha it was a turning point, a moment that transformed her from a victim into a warrior, ready to take on the world and fight for a future where no one would have to endure what she had. The reckoning had come, and its echoes would be felt for generations to come.